Good afternoon. My name is Esther Mannheimer. I'm mayor of the city of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you to the May 12th Council Budget Work Session. All council members and staff are participating virtually. I'm actually in the mayor's office in City Hall right now, but everyone else is at the respective homes or offices where they are participating virtually. So we appreciate your patience as we work through the council meetings a bit differently. This is our first time being 100% virtual. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by dialing on their phone 855-925-2801. That's 855-925-2801 and entering the code 8658. That's 8658. We are also broadcasting live on Charter Cable channel 193 and on AT&T Uverse channel 99. For those of you out there today, welcome and thank you for tuning in to City Council today. I will now go through and introduce all of the council members who are participating virtually. Please, everyone who's participating virtually, mute your microphones if you are not speaking. And when you have a question or would like to unmute or would like to speak, just go ahead and unmute your microphone and let me know you would like to speak. But then please remember to mute your microphone again after you're done speaking. As I call your name, please say a quick hello during this roll call. First, Vice Mayor Whistler.
Hello.
Councilman Haynes.
Hello.
And Councilman Kapoor.
Hello.
And Councilwoman Mayfield.
Hello, I'm here.
And Councilwoman Smith.
Hello.
And Councilman Young.
Hello.
Okay. We also have with us the city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Hello.
And the city attorney, Brad Branham.
Hello, everyone.
And city clerk, Maggie Burleson. Maggie, you might be muted. I did not hear you say hello, except down the hall.
Hello.
Very good. Okay. So our agenda for today's work session includes, first we'll hear an introduction from the city manager, Deborah Campbell. We'll hear a presentation by the Chief Financial Officer, Barbara Whitehorn, and then some discussion and questions with and from the City Council. And as usual during our budget work sessions, there is no public comment. Again, council members, if you have a question during the presentation, just unmute your microphone and let me know. And now we will begin. I'll turn it over to the city manager, Deborah Campbell, for opening comments.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon again to the mayor and council. This is I think the third budget work session. We had one in March at your retreat. We had one in April. And this is our third one, and this was one that was added, and we appreciate you all giving us the time to add this work session in, particularly during these unprecedented times. The mayor has kind of provided you an overview of what we hope to get accomplished, which is to provide you with an update on where we are in terms of ending our current fiscal year and giving you kind of the financial status. And then lastly, we will spend the majority of our time previewing the recommended budget going into the next fiscal year. And as you know, I like to almost begin presentations with the end in mind. So if we could go to the second slide. I would like to provide you generally with some key takeaways because as we did in April, it was extremely dense with a lot of numbers and information. And I just want to make sure that that we have some kind of summary comments or, as stated, the takeaways. This is going to be a difficult budget season for us because of COVID-19. There's a lot of uncertainty, and we see that lasting certainly into the next fiscal year. We've really have presented this and developed this, unfortunately, as a continuation budget with limited service enhancements. No additional services are being recommended in terms of funding, except for there will be two minor ones that are recommended, and our Chief Financial Officer, Barbara Whitehorn, will be presenting those. Departments worked a lot on making cuts with a focus on minimizing operational impacts. These cuts did not come easy. We were very, very strategic and precise. We didn't just tell our departments, just go do a 5 or 10% budget cut. We wanted to make sure that we were extremely focused on, again, minimizing operational impacts. So some departments may have offered up more to support other initiatives, as well as the community's priorities and council priorities. We think even with state and federal support, that we may also need to dip into our rainy day fund, which is our fund which is needed to support these efforts. And we have faded to black on my screen.
Deborah, you're not seeing the presentation. Is that, okay, here it comes.
Has it come back up on you all's end? Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, with that in mind, I will pass it over to Barbara Whitehorn, who's going to do the bulk of the presentation. So thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Thank you, Mayor, members of council. Good afternoon. I look forward to giving you an update on this year's budget and a preview of the manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2021. So the current year, just to kind of recap what was discussed back on April 14th, we made some significant operational changes, including fare-free transit, free on-street parking and garage parking. We've deferred and waived some leases, monthly charges, and loan payments. We've made a contribution to the One Bunkum Fund, and we've provided shelter for people experiencing homelessness. These decisions, these operational changes come with significant revenue and expenditure impacts, as do all of the impacts from COVID itself, including sales tax and all the other things that are affected because the economy has been closed down. Next slide, please. Spending will continue for essential services, as the manager discussed, and we included in this year's budget and next year's the implementation of the $31,200 minimum pay for all city employees, and that's the annualized minimum pay. We are implementing targeted strategic reductions, again, as the manager discussed, and delays in spending wherever possible in order to realize savings. The general and the parking funds will use fund balance as expenses are anticipated to exceed revenues in both funds. Federal and state assistance will help to mitigate some financial impact, but certainly not all of it. Okay. So changes since April 14th. In the general fund, we have lowered our ABC revenue estimate by another $200,000. That's about 10%, a little less than 10% of what we collect in a year. And that's because the majority of ABC revenue actually comes from purchases through restaurants, not individuals going to the ABC store to pick up a bottle of vodka. So that's why we've lowered that, because restaurants have been closed. We are anticipating a 20% decline from March to June in our sales tax. And this is after discussions with other cities across the state to kind of determine where that needs to fall. There has been a state deferral of vehicle registrations for 5 months. And what that means to us is that people that have to register their car now, say their registration expires May 31st, have until August to pay that. So some of the revenue that we would collect in fiscal year 20 is going to be instead collected in fiscal year 21. But we have no way of knowing exactly how much that is or what that impact is going to be this year and next year. So we have ongoing major uncertainty in revenue estimates, again, especially sales taxes. More changes in the general fund. When we did all those strategic cuts and really worked with departments to find areas of savings, we identified approximately $1 million in savings through departmental budget reviews and the hiring freeze that is in place. We anticipate that expenses in the general fund will exceed revenues in the range of $2.5 to $5 million.
Barbara, let me interrupt you for just a moment. Council members, are any of you experiencing feedback or difficulty hearing?
No.
I'm hearing a lot of feedback. I think somebody has it muted, and it could be in the budget department.
Okay. I hear shuffling as well. All right, well.
Okay, let's see.
Okay.
Is this still, are we still hearing any feedback?
Sounds good to me at this point.
Okay, good deal. Yay. Okay, so we identified approximately that $1 million in savings. And again, we anticipate revenues will be exceeded by expenditures in the range of $2.5 to $5 million for this fiscal year. And that's a little lower than the previous estimate because we have identified some savings. Available fund balance at the end of the year is anticipated to drop to between 14 and 16%. That's down from approximately 18. And our federal and state assistant total amounts are unknown at this point. We have some idea, but not all of it. Okay, so looking at sales tax, we just wanted to provide a little bit of a graphic to give you an idea of what sales tax looks like. It goes up and down every month as we go through tourism cycles and all that. But the green dotted line is where we anticipate sales tax coming in significantly under where we budgeted. The budget is the blue line. Okay, go on to the next slide. And the current year general fund update. Back in March at the retreat, we anticipated that revenues would be about $133.4 million. We now believe that that will be $2.5 to $4 million less than that. Expenses were anticipated to be $132.8. We expect those to be around $131.8. We've got some feedback from Deborah, I believe. Okay, good deal. Okay, so revenue versus expenses, again, we expect that $2.5 to $5 million shortfall. And here's a current year fund balance update. If no fund balance were needed, we did anticipate ending the year at almost 18%. Our best case scenario is that we will end at 16%. We believe that worst case is about 14%. And as you know, your policy as council is to try to keep us at 15%. And that is actually specifically for events like this, so that we can use those rainy day funds when it's really necessary. So this isn't something to panic about. This is something to say, great that we have this on hand and that we are able to use it in an appropriate way during an emergency. Okay,
Barbara, can you expand a little bit on what is fund balance? What are we talking about there? What is that, and how is it measured? 14% of what?
It's measured as a percent of the expenditures budgeted, and cities like to keep on hand, and it's kind of best practice to keep on hand about 2 months worth of expenditures, so that if no money came in for 2 full months, you would have enough available cash. It's essentially available cash to cover 2 months of expenditures. So
it's a percentage of our general fund expenditures.
Yes, our general fund annual expenditures. And so when we were at 18%, that's really good. And because we were up a little higher than we needed to be, having to spend some down is not catastrophic to the city. It really just shows that we have used good financial planning and good financial management in order to be prepared for something like this COVID-19 crisis. Okay, next slide. All right, so additional updates since April 14th, the enterprise funds. The transit COVID-19 expenses and budget shortfall will be covered with CARES Act funding. And tonight you will see the first budget amendment for bus driver protective equipment. That's $500,000 to provide shielding basically between the fare box and the drivers that should help them be protected during this pandemic. We also anticipate in the parking fund that we will see a $1.5 million shortfall due to the suspension of parking deck and on-street parking fees. And I've got a graphic on the next slide for that. And this one is a little more dramatic, as you can see, because we have parking kind of going up and down through the months. And then because we suspended all of our parking fees, we go from, $400,000 to $600,000 per month to nothing for April, May. And we don't know how long that trend will continue. Obviously, that'll be a policy decision. And we'll go back to look at the Transit CARES Act. In fiscal year 20, we anticipate spending about $1.5 million of the total $3.75 million that was allocated to our transit system by the CARES Act. And those funds will be spent to ensure safety, continuity of services to the best that we can manage that during this crisis, and to mitigate revenue loss. So that's in this fiscal year, we anticipate $1.5 million. And go ahead. And in the next fiscal year, we don't know how long this event will continue. So we broke this into how much it would cost for 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, continuing operations with social distancing and having to provide extra vehicles on the really busy routes and trying to do all of those things that are required to keep everyone safe in COVID. And so here we have what it would cost for 3 months, which is $1.2 million, 6 months is 2.4, and then 12 months, if this were to continue for the full fiscal year, would be $4.8 million. Obviously, as you can see, somewhere between 3 and 6 months is the point at which we exceed the amount of money we receive under the CARES Act. So CARES Act could not actually cover if we had to stay in this particular operating scenario for a full year.
Barbara?
Yes, ma'am.
Help me out with the math on this page.
Mm-hmm.
If you add those down, I don't think 400,000 and 275,000 equals $1.2 million. Is it per month?
Oh, yes.
I don't understand this schedule.
I think we put this together in a hurry and we don't have the numbers correct. The totals are correct, but I think we've got the monthly numbers in some of these where they shouldn't be. But we will update this after the budget and after this presentation and make sure that the correct one is out there.
Thank you. And since I'm unmuted right now, again, I just caution city staff from using expressions like worst case scenario. Frankly, I don't think we have any idea what's going to happen. And so I would just, put in estimate best worst case scenario or something, because it could get worse, even in this fiscal year.
Of course. Thank you.
And Barbara, I've got a question as well. This is Julie. The row for mitigating revenue loss, is that just fare box loss? That seems high to me, but maybe our system has gotten so robust that is in fact just fare revenue loss.
I think it's fare revenue and other things. I'm not entirely sure what. We can put that as a question for Jessica Morris to answer after this presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, we'll move on. Okay, our financial impact summary. Again, in the general fund, our projected fund balance decline is between $2.5 and $5 million. Our parking services fund balance decline is anticipated to be $1.5 million. And those are separate fund balances. And that's something important to understand, that when we usually talk about fund balance, we're talking about the general fund, but each of the funds, like parking, transit, the enterprise funds, they each have their own fund balance that they can rely on. So parking services will see a decline. The other enterprise funds like water and stormwater are unlikely to experience any major financial impact in the current year.
Barbara, this is Gwen. Even the Civic Center
has fund balance? Yes. Well, the Civic Center's whole budget has been reduced to show that they have less expenditures and less revenue.
So it's kind of netting out, and they don't have to really take a bunch out of fund balance this year.
I think they may have some fund balance allocation, but not to the degree that parking and the general fund are having. Is that right?
Thank you.
Oh, 0. Tony says 0.
So thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, now this is time for you all. If you want, I can turn it over to the mayor and you can discuss so far or ask any questions.
Deborah got kicked out, our city manager, and I'm not sure if she made it back in yet. She's back in. Okay. All right, good. All right. So do we have any questions for Barbara at this stage of the presentation? Oh, it looks like Julie got kicked out. Anybody who didn't get kicked out who might have a question for Barbara?
This is Julie. I don't have a question. I just want to thank the staff, going back to the transit and the CARES Act funding, for prioritizing replacing service for our current riders who have been impacted by the reduction in service. Very, very glad to see that, and also the investments in the safety improvements. One question I do have, and I think I have this right, but are we considering using any of that CARES Act funding for any kind of hazard pay or bonus pay for our transit drivers and other transit workers that are, clearly sort of frontline workers at this point? And I realize that gets complicated because we don't employ those people directly. There's a contract with a management company, but my understanding of the CARES Act funding is that we could amend our contract with the management company.
Make sure you mute your microphones, folks. There's some folks that are not muted and it's making a lot of noise.
Okay, so that's my question is, have we considered using any of the CARES Act funding to provide any kind of hazard pay or bonus pay for our drivers and other transit workers?
Julie, was your question for Deborah or were you asking Barbara? Because I hope you're asking Barbara because Deborah got kicked out.
I will ask whoever can answer that question.
Okay, I can't answer that question, but I am going to turn that over to Jessica. So give me just 1 second.
That's very high tech. Okay. Jessica's getting plugged in. We can't hear you, Jessica.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I'm happy to repeat it.
Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Jessica. Thanks for being there. So my question is, have we considered using any of the CARES funding as pass-through funding as hazard pay or bonuses for our transit drivers and workers who I think we have to consider sort of frontline workers at this point?
My understanding of the CARES Act is that it is only authorized to be used for administrative pay. And so that means that it's to be used for salaries, benefits, at a normal pay rate, as far as I can tell from the legislation. It specifically says administrative pay, and it says that you can't use it for other expenses that are related to operations, personnel wise, other than administrative pay.
Can we, if that's, I guess I would ask if we could check to make sure that that interpretation is correct. I'm not questioning you, but if you haven't sort of done any double checking on that, if we can check that. And while I have you, let me also ask, in the funding that you've indicated would be set aside for to help better meet the needs of our current riders, given the cutbacks in service that we've experienced. Have you developed a plan for that yet, or are you still in the process of doing that?
We have developed several options that we're still trying to work through. The biggest challenge that we have right now, besides staffing levels, is the social distancing requirements, which make us do the 10-person limit. So we've essentially cut our capacity by more than half. So in a perfect world, we would essentially have twice the buses and twice the drivers, at least. So one of the things that we're looking at is hiring a private transportation company to help support our service. We're also looking at renting 15-passenger vans and either redeploying existing city staff or having RATP Dev hire some temporary drivers. All of those things are expenses that we'll have to incur, and it still may not bring us back up to full capacity, but that's what we're aiming for and hoping to get implemented as quickly as possible.
Okay, great. Do you have when you say as quickly as possible, is that like 2 weeks? Is that a month? Do you have any idea?
I think that I would prefer to say a month, unfortunately. And one of the many hurdles is that we still have to follow procurement regulations. And so we need to put out to bid technically the services that we're requesting potentially from some of our local transportation providers. And so we're just trying to streamline that as quickly as we can. But the other thing is that since that service will likely be over the limit for city manager approval, we also have to bring it to you guys. So the process is part of the setback.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. And then one final question: if the situation that we're in with the pandemic ends earlier than we maybe anticipate, and we have CARES Act funding left over, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, but are you giving any thought to how we might use that funding, whether that would be if we have a list of one-time capital things that we might spend it on, whether we could sort of bank it and use it to start service expansion when we're ready to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if we are fortunate enough to have some leftover funding, the needs that transit has are greater than pretty much any amount that we could get. Just thinking, putting the transit master plan aside, our facilities are in desperate need. But if you took that off the table as well, we have the feasibility study for the garage that we're doing right now. That's currently being funded with general fund dollars. That's a very easy thing to use CARES Act money for. We could do further bus stop improvements. We could do a whole host of things with that money. My recommendation, of course, is always going to be to use that for use money that's one-time money for one-time things. Although I definitely would love to see us be able to implement the next phase of the master plan.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Those are all my questions. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Do any other council members have any questions at this point for any of the staff on the items that we've gone through so far?
Mayor, this is Councilman Kapoor. I just had a couple of just one quick comment, if I could. This unfortunately is actually the third call I've had today, trying to figure out how to deal with the situation. And I think just from the perspective of expectations of the public, I mean, I know we're talking about what would happen if things got better. I think the more likely situation is that we're going to have to be talking about what's going to be if things are actually worse here. And I know, Barbara, you're going to be talking about in the next section of the presentation kind of the sales tax revenues. And if you could, kind of a pre-question here, if you could talk a little bit about once you get there, how confident you all feel about the estimates that we're using there for sales tax. And in the event, as you all had said in a prior presentation, I think during the Great Recession, we saw the sales taxes on an annual basis go down by about 10%. A question that I would have for you is, let's assume for a moment that we're too optimistic in the numbers that we have. They come in lower. First off, the question would be, when would we find that out? When would we start to know that? And the second question would be, what actions would we anticipate we take, to address that? So I guess this is sort of a pre-question, and I'll ask it. I'll wait to hear from it as you guys go through.
Hey, any other questions? Okay, we're going to go back to the presentation then. And we've updated the table for transit. So if we could go back to that when we get the presentation up, then we'll have the accurate numbers in there. And we don't have to leave everyone confused. Okay, just go back up a few slides to the transit slide. This one, yes. Okay, so here are the numbers correctly in there. So the bottom line didn't change, but we did have some of the numbers incorrectly for the 3, 6, and 12-month amounts. But as you can see, we would still sometime between 3 and 6 months of operations at their current level, we would run out of the CARES Act funding. Okay, so we can go back. Yeah, now we'll go into the framework for the fiscal 2021 manager's preliminary recommended budget. So the budget schedule's been updated. As you all know, we had a work session in April and a work session today. Today would have been when the proposed budget would be presented, but with COVID, we needed some extra time to really try to wrap our arms around how the revenues and expenditures were going to look, and how bad things were going to get. And I still think, to Councilman Kapoor's point, we really don't have an idea of how bad things could get or how quickly or slowly we will recover. And that's why we are emphasizing that we have major uncertainty in all of our numbers, and sales tax, I think, is right at the top of that. As some of you may know, March retail sales year over year fell 6.2%. This was in March. In November 2008, during the Great Recession, sales tax fell 4.3%. So that 6.2% represents the largest year-over-year drop ever recorded. So we're sort of in uncharted territory right now and doing our best to take a shot at what this is going to look like. And we're using all of the resources that we have, trying to work with other cities to understand what they're estimating. So what you're going to see as we talk about this budget going forward is a lot of uncertainty, but we do have some assumptions that we can talk about how we got there. So go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so updates to the key takeaways from your retreat. March feels like it was like several years ago. as I'm sure any of us can attest to. Since March, we have even more uncertain economic outlook. We were uncertain in March because we saw COVID coming, but at this point, it's the economic uncertainty is much higher. We're going to have minimal revenue growth next fiscal year, and it will be used up by ongoing operating costs, even after making reductions to expenditures. And while enhancements can be considered if the fiscal picture improves, additional revenue would be necessary. And that's something we talked about at the retreat, was that there is not revenue growth to support new initiatives without new revenue. Okay, go ahead. We continue to use our guiding principles, essential service delivery, enhancing customer value, and strategic alignment to guide development of the budget. If you're going to go ahead. But how do we implement these guiding principles in a crisis? So number one, we want to ensure the safety of our staff and our community. Number two, we want to work to limit impacts on existing services. And number three, we want to be prepared for the plan to change. All right, go on. So ensuring safety is critical. We have to ensure the safety of our employees and of our community, even if it is at a higher cost. And we are likely to receive some financial support to offset additional costs from federal, state, and other sources. However, how much of those costs they will offset is uncertain. Okay, go ahead. We want to limit the impact to ongoing services. What we have done is temporarily suspended our regular OPEB trust. That's our other post-employment benefit trust payments. We make a payment to that every year to increase the amount of that trust. Payments to our risk fund, our health fund, and our capital transfers for our capital program. We've temporarily suspended those. And we are trying not to use any one-time revenue sources to add any recurring costs. Okay, 3. And being prepared, contingency planning. What if the outlook worsens? You know, what if we don't recover as quickly as we would like to? We would anticipate operational reductions with, of course, a goal of minimizing the impact on customers, but we would see service reductions and we would be forced to defer maintenance. We would also possibly continue deferral of some of the transfers to the OPEB trust, the risk fund, the health fund, and our capital program. Okay. And if the outlook improves, we would start to address some of the operational needs that are kind of hurting right now, including restoring deferred maintenance funding and implementing the remaining recommendations of the compensation study. The 31,200 was phase 1 of the compensation study. And we would hope to be able to implement the rest of it, but right now that is not realistic. And we would reinstate the transfers to our OPEB trust, our risk and health funds, and our capital program. And then, of course, we would put additional resources towards achieving strategic goals. Okay. Any questions after that?
So Barbara, just on the OPEB, so are we making no contribution this year, or help me understand the OPEB?
We are making no contribution this year.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? Okay. All right, we can go back to the presentation.
I'm present.
Okay, here comes the presentation again. Okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now we'll preview the preliminary recommended budget. You've seen the framework, so now this is the preview of what we'll do. The budget will continue funding for existing services with, as we talked about, limited enhancements, new programs, or initiatives. It will maintain the current property tax rate, and we recommend no fee increases. You know, we talked about fee increases that would have been adopted in April. At this point, we are recommending no fee increases at all. Oh, and I need to make a correction. Councilmember Kapoor, you asked about the OPEB contribution. we are making a contribution. We're keeping it the same as the prior year. Every year we increase the amount, and we're not increasing the amount. So thankfully, Tony McDowell is in the room with me and can correct me when I'm wrong. So there you go. All right. Strategic alignment. I think it's really important that even in a crisis like we're in now and in really hard times, we need to talk about the things that we are doing that align with the strategies and goals that council has for our community. So we wanted to include a slide about the ongoing things that we're still doing. We're still implementing the Transit Master Plan Phase 1. We're still working on expanding partnerships with Asheville City Schools, developing a business inclusion program to increase minority vendor participation, and other key strategic goals of council. And then we wanted to highlight specifically the next slide, actually, perfect. Sustainability initiatives, because we have the renewable energy installations that are going to be happening, and those are already funded, so those will continue. And then the climate justice initiative as well. So I just thought it was important. It's a little bit of like good news in all of the like, holy cow, the glass is half empty. We want to give you a little something that, hey, we are still trying to keep these things going and make sure that we're addressing the needs of the community. Okay, go ahead. All right, so now here are the details. Go ahead. So here are some of our revenue assumptions. Property tax, 3.9% growth in the base, but the collection rate has been lowered by the county, so we don't anticipate significant growth in property tax receipts. Sales tax, we anticipate no growth, like zero over the course of the year. We did a month-to-month analysis, like we have an analysis for what we expect in July, August, September, all the way through the year. Overall, though, we anticipate 0% growth, but a small bump from the Mission HCA merger. And the reason for that is not sales tax that they pay, but rather the allocation of sales tax from the county is based on property tax value in the city. And because HCA is taxable and Mission was not, the property that HCA owns is now part of that taxable property tax, which increases our piece of the pie for sales tax, if that makes sense.
Barbara, when
Yes,
you
ma'am.
say no growth, is that based on our projected sales tax revenue for the end of the year, the already reduced, or is it based on no growth based on the current budget?
It's based on anticipated end of year. So no growth from the total for the end of this year.
Okay. All right.
And then in development services, we anticipate a 7% decline, ABC revenue, a 10% decline, and investment earnings due to the cut in the investment rates, $1.1 million decline in our investment earnings. And we had just seen that start to ramp up for those of you that follow our investment earnings. So that's kind of disappointing, but it was probably the right move in an economic crisis to lower interest rates.
Barbara, before you move on, sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
This is actually a question for Gwen. Gwen, were you thinking that sales tax might need to go in as a declining value rather than as just a stable value?
Yeah, I think this is optimistic is where I would view that. And I guess I'd like to, one question I'd have later on is what's the county projecting? I mean, is this consistent with the county's number and assumption? And again, just to Councilman Kapoor's note, when we start to see these numbers coming in, I think we need a plan B, C, and J. So
I'm a little confused though, because I thought we were showing a loss in projected sales tax.
Well, a loss based on, had we been on budget, but they're basically saying it'll be flat based on what they're actually projecting for the end of the year. So again, I think that's a little I don't know what it is, but my sense would be it's optimistic.
We did do projections based on months. So there are several months that we're anticipating significant drops in sales tax. And then what we're anticipating is a recovery towards the end of the fiscal year where we should see some growth, and where that netted out was to zero. And we can share that with you all. And you can look at what exactly we did for those calculations.
Yeah, I think that'd be great to see, because that is also going to allow us to have a way through the year to see how we're doing relative to our estimates, and give us a little bit of a heads up if we need to
adjust it down.
Reduce other expenses. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And Barbara, just on this too, I remember historically there had been questions about trying to figure out where the sales tax comes from, in terms of the actual people who are paying it. And I recall, I think it might have been Tony telling us that historically the state has kind of kept that very close. But in this situation, I'm wondering whether there's any opportunity to try and go back to the state to say, hey, look, we know you guys give us sort of aggregate numbers for the months, but it would be helpful for us to know where is it coming from, right? Because if we're getting a significant component of it from tourism-based industries, and we don't anticipate that ramping up, that's a lot different than if it's kind of across the board with grocery stores and elsewhere. And again, I realize historically they've not given that to us, but this may be one of those situations where just for planning purposes, it would really, really help to know the composite mix of what's coming in and where it's coming in, because that'll give you guys a much better opportunity to estimate what that may look like.
Well, and the state is doing projections for its own budget because it does rely even more heavily on sales tax revenue than cities do. It's got income tax and sales tax revenue, and they're projecting, I don't know, I can't remember what the last number is, but it's a significant loss. So, there should be some forecast, I'm sure, that you all have been able to look at to use as an estimate for this. I was just looking at the House in Congress, the House bill, which won't pass the Senate, but maybe will turn into something that will pass the Senate. A local government money to come to the next wave of funding to help manage the losses in the pandemic, and it actually gives a chart of all the revenue they would propose to give to specific local governments. And for this next year, they have marked $50 million for Asheville. I'm rounding; it's like 51 million. And I'm curious what that's based on. If that is a number, they came up with these numbers because they think these will be the actual losses suffered by the cities of North Carolina on this list. If so, we would want that information to understand how they came with that calculation. Or is it more, this is a little bit more of a positioning bill, and they sort of put numbers together and knowing it wouldn't pass, and it was more of a conversation starter.
Right. And I don't know where those numbers come from. That would be significantly more than even if we collected no sales tax. So, yeah.
And Barbara, sorry, go ahead, Deborah.
I'm sorry. I know that we have prepared a memo that talks about all of the budget assumptions. I think Councilmember Whistler asked for this. We did not get it out to you all before the presentation, but certainly can provide it afterwards. So I know it doesn't respond to all the questions that you all asked, but I think it'll give you a better idea of what our baseline assumptions are and give you the more detailed numbers and the sources.
That'd be great if we could see that sooner rather than later.
Absolutely.
And probably a question that's answered in that, but I'll go ahead and ask it now, is on the property tax, you're projecting 3.9% growth, but because of the lower collection rate, are you are you projecting zero? I mean, are you projecting it to be flat, or are you projecting a 3.9% growth?
We're not projecting a 3.9% growth. That's just a growth in the base. But the actual receipts, we can't budget more than the collection rate. Like, even if the county says the collection rate this year is going to be 99.3, which is what they've said, that's the number we have to use next year. Normally, we would get about 99.9% collections. So that's about $600,000 difference there. So we may see the 99.9. I mean, that may be reality, but our budget has to reflect the 99.3%. So we're not anticipating much growth in property tax.
Okay, great, thanks.
All right, next slide. Okay, salaries and wages. And an important thing to point out is that we have asked a lot, the city has asked a lot of employees. You know, we've redeployed employees to new jobs. We've really, people have worked really hard to keep the community safe and to be safe in their jobs and to try to do the best that they can. And moving into this next budget year, we're asking more of them. We're continuing to ask more of them in the crisis, but we're also not able to fund the other recommendations of the compensation study, aside from the $31,002 minimum pay, and of course the elders required increase, but employees don't see that. And we have budgeted right now no general wage increase for employees, and we're assuming a continuation of the hiring freeze through the first 6 months. Okay, general fund operating expenditures. The primary goal in the general fund is continuity of operations. So we will continue transit support. We are continuing to collaboratively work with departments to hold the operating budgets flat year over year, which is pretty challenging, but the directors are really stepping up and their staffs are really working to find strategic cuts that are really intentional. And the budget in general is being developed with that intentionality and a focus on equity. Because what we don't want to do is make cuts in the budget that disproportionately impact certain areas of our community in a really negative way. So all the cuts that we are making are really strategic, and we're trying to make those in a way that are thoughtful and equitable to our community. Okay, go on ahead. Okay. Staff is recommending two, I don't want to say additions to the budget, but two new programs in the budget. But we are recommending a reallocation of a portion of the strategic partnership funds, the SPF funds, to support equity and address opportunity gap goals that council has stated are, very important to them. And that is $35,000 to support Asheville City Schools after school coordinator, and then $43,000 to the Parks and Recreation Department to extend community center hours and summer youth and teen programming. So these are the only two additional programs that staff is recommending. And again, we're recommending a reallocation of existing funds, not an addition to the budget. Okay. So in summary, for the general fund, I will, go ahead.
Can I just clear, this is Gwen, sorry, I keep forgetting to introduce myself. So what you're saying, if you go back to the other slide, is we have, or this slide, I'm sorry, we have X amount of money set aside for the strategic partnerships. That in the aggregate will stay the same, but rather than distributing the full amount in the traditional way that we do, you're proposing that there's 68,000 of those strategic funds to be put aside, and then so what the total amount minus 78 would be available to be distributed the way we normally do it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, go
And
ahead.
this is Julie. I'll just point out on those two particular allocations, the Housing and Community Development Committee had recommended that all of the strategic partnership funds go to helping to address the opportunity gap. And so these two expenditures and two recommendations are in line with that recommendation. I don't remember that recommendation had actually made it to the full council for consideration. It did not. But just so folks know, these two things are not inconsistent with what HCD had recommended.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Okay, and in summary, the general fund budget is all about continuity of operations. There's no funding for new services. And we do anticipate a fund balance appropriation of up to 1.5 million, reducing fund balance to the range of 13 to 15%. Now, we are going to see some money from the allocation that the governor made, the $150 million, COVID allocation. We will receive some of that from our county, and that may mitigate some of this, but we do nevertheless anticipate some level of fund balance allocation just to balance the budget for fiscal year 2021.
And Barbara, this is Gwen again, sorry. Just to clarify, at this point, other than the CARES Act funding that's really transit oriented, we are not anticipating actually budgeting any more, any state or federal funds.
We may be able to budget funds from the state, but I'm not entirely sure on that yet. Okay. But right now, like when I say $1.5 million, that would be without any additional aid.
Okay. And then my other question, and it's relatively small, I realize, but the fees that we get, that the city gets from, say Aston Park and the Nature Center, what's the inherent assumption there?
Right now, we're assuming those are relatively minor in the big picture. We're right. Assuming that they will reopen in July and that we'll collect those fees. If we
100%
see that,
or like a 50% level.
What are we budgeting those at, Tony?
100%. Of course, if we don't, then we've got expenses to match revenue.
Okay, we're budgeting those at 100%, but if that's looking like not reasonable, what we'll do is cut expenditures to match it. So because usually those are the types of programs where we can do that.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. Okay, moving on to enterprise funds, we are recommending no fee increases. As you know, we normally have small fee increases in water and stormwater annually. We're not recommending any fee increases this year. This just isn't the time to increase fees on the community. That just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. There is significant uncertainty around re-implementation of fees for transit and parking that may continue to impact revenues in those funds. And we do anticipate that even when parking fees are put back into place, that revenue will likely be very slow to rebound. Also in enterprise funds, our water CIP charge, which is a charge that everyone sees on their bill, is going to be eliminated. And that is a $7 million reduction in revenue to the water fund. It does not have an impact on water operations at all. It is a transfer to the water capital fund, and the water capital fund balance will make up that difference for fiscal year 2021. We are working with Raftalis, who are external consultants, on a rate study to better balance the cost burden of our rates between commercial and residential customers. So we'll probably have some adjustment to rates for fiscal year 21-22, but we will have no adjustment to rates for this year. And then the Harris Center budget has been reduced to reflect fewer expected events, but that's like a net amount. We reduce expenditures and revenues. Moving on to our capital improvement program. So we're not adding anything new to the capital program right now. Projects that are already underway will continue. And as I'm sure all of you have seen, I hope all of you have seen, we have gotten a lot of road and sidewalk work done during this event. It's kind of a bit of a silver lining for having an economy that's shut down, is that we can work on roads much more easily. It's not there's not really much of a silver lining, but that's kind of a good thing. But again, no new projects are funded. Projects are included and continuing if a delay could jeopardize external funding, like in the case of a grant-funded project that has a time frame. And then our 2016 GEO bond projects are also continuing to ensure completion within that time frame. Go ahead. We are also continuing our allocations for facility maintenance, computer replacement, vehicle replacement, road resurfacing, and neighborhood sidewalks, because these are all pretty critical infrastructure things. All right, and key takeaways, just to revisit these. I know the city manager went into these, but we continue to see ongoing major uncertainty. These numbers could change between now and the manager's recommended budget in 2 weeks. Departments worked really hard to make cuts with a focus on minimizing the operational impacts. And even with state and federal support, fund balance is going to be needed to support operations. Okay, go ahead. Our next steps, you'll receive the manager's recommended budget on May 26th. The budget public hearing will be June 9th, and then budget adoption will be June 23rd. All right, good. Now it's time for y'all to discuss or ask questions again.
All right, we've reached the conclusion, so get all your questions out now.
Okay, this is Brian, and I don't have a question per se. More, I just wanted to open up discussion around employee salaries. I'm extremely pleased that we've managed to keep the $31,200 minimum salary in this budget. But according to the information I've received from Just Economics, we have 35 firefighters that are currently paid under our own 2019 living wage requirement of $12.15, including benefits. And I think no matter how we look at this, we arrived at the $31,200 figure based on a 40-hour work week at $15 an hour. And I don't think there's any way to come to a conclusion that our firefighters are making $15 an hour. So I'm just opening up the discussion, hoping that we might find a way to do something for our firefighters. According to what Just Economics told me, that if we adjusted the levels up to the $12.15 an hour, the total cost on that would be $37,000. And to me, that seems like the least we could do. From doing research today and recently on firefighter pay, according to my research, Asheville firefighters are paid virtually less than virtually every city of our size or greater. And we also have the highest cost of living in the state. And we are the only city in the state that the cost of living is actually above the national average. So all I'm asking is we have a discussion about trying to do something to bring up the starting salaries for our firefighters and do whatever we can for them within this budget.
Hey, do we have on this call, this is Esther, on the issue of firefighters, we've received a lot of emails from firefighters in the last couple of weeks around the council's initiative to go to a minimum wage of $15 an hour or the equivalent salary, $31,200 a year. Of course, the issue with firefighters is that they sleep at the firehouse, so they're technically working in excess of a 40-hour work week. They're on the clock because they are sleeping in the firehouse. And in talking with staff about firefighter pay, it's my understanding that the way we pay firefighters is similar, and apparently, and probably VJ knows a lot more about this than anybody else, but the way we pay firefighters is in line with the way cities try to structure the salary, because they do work different schedules than a traditional work week. But you raised an interesting point, and I'm wondering, one of my primary concerns is, are our salaries for firefighters competitive as to our area, Greenville, South Carolina, or, looking at other cities in North Carolina or other areas in our region? If you're a firefighter and you're looking for work, how do we stack up? And are we looking at that? Are we looking at that issue? And I don't know if there's any staff or anyone on this that can speak to that.
This is Deborah. Council Member Haynes and Mayor, we greatly appreciate you all raising this issue as it relates to firefighters' pay. You're right, Mayor, in terms of the calculation. On an hourly basis, it's really, really difficult to compare and contrast what someone who is out of the public safety pay plan with the public safety pay plan, because they are different pay plans. They work different hours, and so therefore it's not a comparable comparison in terms of hourly rates. What we have tried to do with the compensation and classification study is to actually look at all of our employees' pay to determine if they were competitive or comparable to communities of our size or communities that we aspire to be like. That study will be done in late May, early June. We will have additional information. My preference, the same way that we looked at the 31,200, we said, if you all would give us a chance to look holistically at salaries, in addition to just those who make 31,200, but what about those people who have been here for 2 and 3 years, who are very close to that salary level, to address what we call the compression challenge. So I would hope, again, that you all will allow us to have the total look at pay and benefits as it relates to firefighters or public safety folks, as well as other employees. What I would hate to do is to move the salary hourly rate to $15 an hour for some firefighters, bump them up against, again, firefighters who have been here for 5 years who are not making that salary, again, because the number of hours are different than they are for a 40-hour-a-week employee. But with that, I'll close. I hope that responds to some of the issues and questions that you all raised. And I guess, as I said, we said, VJ is working with a lot of other communities and probably has more information.
Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, VJ.
So sorry, Mayor. This is VJ. I'll just jump in on this, but also kind of more directly. I mean, I think having the conversation about employee compensation is important. I agree with everything that Deborah said over here, and I know it's hard for folks to understand, how firefighter schedules work relative to non-uniform employees. And just on a personal level, it's something that I work with quite a bit. In the next couple of days, I'm going to try and put some sort of information out to the public on how to understand that, and that's going to be coming from me and not from the city. So hopefully I'll get that out in the next day or two. But I do want to say this, since we're in the budget discussion here, and Brian had mentioned just economics, and I respect the advocacy that they're doing on this. The question that we have to ask ourselves during the budget process is, okay, where are we going to get the money to do that, right? I would love to see a flat dollar amount, a lump sum for employees this year. One of my priorities was frankly trying to, advocate for the compensation study. The fact of the matter is, and folks may not want to hear this, but there are a couple of lines in our budget that are going up. Transit in particular, that is going up significantly this year. That went up significantly the year before that. That is being funded through the general fund revenues. Most cities in North Carolina don't fund transit through their general funds. They have a dedicated sales tax. And so looking at this city from a financial perspective, right, which is kind of what I do, I don't see how we sustainably long-term fund transit and implement the master plan without that dedicated source. And compensation, employee compensation, I think is a great example of what is getting squeezed out of our budget because we're funding transit through the general fund, which I know is also a priority of just economics. So it's not their responsibility to tell us where the money comes from. That's our job, right? They're advocating. We're the ones who have to make that decision. We have that responsibility. But whether it's to the firefighters or any other employee group right now, we're struggling with that. We're struggling with that even before we were in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis. And I would love to find a way. Look, there's the possibility, based on what I understand from the CARES Act, that we could use some of the transit funding to sort of supplant some of the funding that we are taking from the general fund. Would folks want to do that? Would folks want to take the CARES Act, fund transit, some of the things in transit, and use some of those dollars that we free up to go to employee compensation? I don't think there's a question on this council about whether or not to look at employee compensation. I think there's a desire for all of us to increase that. The question is, where do you get that money from? How do you pay for it? And again, right now, based on the way the budget is, based on the line items that are going up, I mean, they're going to a couple of different items. That's what's being increased, and so that's my sort of addition to the compensation conversation.
This is Julie. Deborah, just to confirm something that you just said, the compensation study will be finished the end of this month or within the next month. Is that right? And so at that point, we will see, hopefully, where our firefighters stack up against other communities in North Carolina or communities our size. So we'll just have more information at that point. That is correct. Okay.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. And to VJ's point about, a dedicated fund for transit, there are, I've certainly been working to get a dedicated fund for transit for, I'm going to say about 9 years now. There are legislative hurdles that we've talked about many times. Everybody knows. I think everybody wants this dedicated source, and we are continuing to work on it. Obviously, that work is on hold right now, as everything seems to be. But as soon as we are on the other side of this, that work with the governor's office and the legislature on a dedicated source of funding for transit will pick back up again. Because I think VJ is right. For a city our size, any city that's going to do transit right has to have a dedicated source. That's what the cities that do it right do. So, thanks.
This is Keith. I would just say, based on the financial constraints that we're under at this current time, it would be prudent to look at that study that's going to be coming out and see where we stand and what the numbers show to see how we move forward. At this point, it's going to be very hard to do anything, but pending when the study comes out, the compensation study for the second phase, I would reserve any sort of action until we know exactly what we're dealing with right now.
And Councilman Young, that's fair, and we will make sure that we are able to, even if the study is not bound and in a ribbon tied around it. But we will have the data and we will be able to present that to you all.
I have a question about the conversation around continuity of operations. I know that there are some transit routes that were cut right around this phase. I wanted to know if we have a timeline or any planning to restore those routes, specifically to the Spruce Hill area.
Councilman Smith, we do. It is part of the strategy that is listed as part of the CARES Act and using that funding to restore those services. Part of the challenge is the social distancing and adding additional services to supplant that. But yes, we are definitely going to restore those services once we get the funding. Or possibly even before we get the funding, we will be able to move forward. Our first priority is going to be safety. We're going to have to retrofit the buses and put up the barriers for the drivers. Once we get past that, we will certainly be looking at extending services. And the reason that it is in that order is because as we take buses offline for repairs, we it's just going to impact scheduling. But yes, we will be adding those routes back in as soon as we can.
Any other questions for staff?
I have a question. I have another question around the SPF funds. I'm kind of grappling with the idea of designating that amount of money to just an after-school program coordinator and extending community center hours, because we have a limitation on how many people we can gather at this time. So even in an after-school setting or a community center setting, we can only gather about 10 students at a time. So with that amount of money, do we feel like that's the best way to repurpose that money just for that area? We might need to think about probably repurposing that money so that we can get a greater impact.
Sure. As we move through these phases of social distancing, the gathering number may be increased in one location, but again, obviously safety is still going to be the highest priority for us. We felt that if council had adopted an opportunity gap focus for the strategic partnership funds, and we have gotten a specific request from the school system to help fund a coordinator, but they also have asked the county for funding and may have asked other organizations or entities. I'm not aware of that. I just know what they asked, that they asked both the city and the county. We believe that the impact that COVID-19 has had on youth is probably the most challenging one out of all the hurdles that the communities across this country are having. We believe that having opportunities for youth to not just go to a center and play, but actually go to a center and also learn is going to be vitally important, probably more important this summer and throughout the year than any one that we have experienced in years. So that was our thinking. And as Barbara said, we wanted to use existing funding without adding to our base, utilizing an existing pot of money and just redirecting it. Ms. Smith, we are certainly open to, if, for example, the funding doesn't come from the county, that we will withdraw that offer, as well as, or unless they get funding from another entity, or that we would consider, I would hate to say that we want continue to extend the center hours. Even if there's just 10, we think that it still brings value to the community to extend those hours.
Any other
Deborah,
questions?
this is Julie. I have one other question. I've raised in earlier budget work sessions the need to support the staffing of the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust. And I know we probably have some existing funds, perhaps housing trust fund funds, or some other funds that have already been allocated to that purpose, but I didn't see that in the presentation and just wanted to ask what the current thinking about that is. They now do have staff. They have hired, a part-time director, and their stability is key to us being able to push out the $1 million that we are holding for them to get going on their mission. So
I will have staff look into that unless Tony or Barbara is there to respond. But I will have staff provide you with the response to that request.
All right, any other questions? All right. Deborah, do you want to close out before I have some, just sort of
Sure.
housekeeping closing remarks, but in terms of the timeline, or maybe Barbara, I'm not sure.
Yeah, if we could get the timeline up again, May 26th is, I believe it's the 26th, is our next presentation, which would be the actual manager's budget recommendation. Then in June, let's see, can we get the present? Okay. If we go back one, there you go. And June 9th would be the public hearing, and then adoption on June 23rd to make the deadline of before the end of the fiscal year, having a budget adopted. We will take the information that you all, questions, additional concerns, and make modifications, include them in our recommended budget on May 26th, and get you all the additional information again that you all requested in answers to your questions. And with that, Mayor, I turn it back over to you. And just thank you all for your patience. And this is a tough budget year for us, but I think we're headed in the right direction, and hopefully you see that we are doing things that are we're trying to be strategically aligned with your council priorities. So thank you.
Okay, so and I want to thank all the staff for working really hard to put this together. Not only are we experiencing a very dynamic and fast changing budget year, also we're trying to do all of this virtually. For the very few handful of people that might be live watching this right now, this took a lot of practice and rehearsals. We've had many rehearsals and worked out hopefully most of the glitches. So thanks to everyone for making this possible. We're going to do it again here at 5 o'clock in just a little over half an hour. The city council meeting will start at 5. And if you're following us online, you can please visit the city council May 12, 2020 virtual meeting page on our virtual engagement hub. It's a separate page from this budget briefing page, so be mindful of that. And again, if you're listening by phone, which is a possibility, you can do that. You can call back at 5 o'clock on the same toll-free line, 855-925-2801. That's 855-925-2801. And the new meeting code is 8659. That's 8659. So thanks very much. And unless anyone has anything further, we'll log out of this meeting and see you back here at 5 o'clock.